Emily thought she had found her forever with Rajiv, an ambitious man from India who promised her love and stability in Texas. But what began as a dream marriage quickly spiraled into obsession, control, and a violent truth hidden beneath the surface. When Rajiv discovered Emily's African-American heritage, the man she once trusted turned into her greatest threat, leading to a night of terror that shocked an entire community. It began like something out of a dream. Emily had always been the kind of woman who believed in happy endings, the sort you see in movies where two people from different worlds fall in love and build a life together. She was 27 years old, outgoing, warm-hearted, and deeply devoted to her family in Texas. Friends described her as someone who could light up a room with her laughter, someone who believed that love could overcome anything. When she met Rajiv through mutual friends, she felt that spark instantly. He was polite, intelligent, and came across as a man who was ready to settle down. Their relationship moved quickly, fueled by late-night conversations, promises of adventure, and a shared desire for stability. When Rajiv proposed, Emily accepted without hesitation. To her, it seemed like fate had handed her the love she had been waiting for. Their wedding took place in a modest ceremony, attended by close relatives and a handful of friends. Emily looked radiant in her white dress, and Rajiv stood tall beside her, smiling proudly for photographs that captured what appeared to be pure joy. Neighbors and family members praised the couple, describing them as perfect for each other, a blend of different cultures united by love. For Emily, it was the happiest day of her life. She thought she had found a partner who would stand by her through every storm, someone who valued her for who she was. The couple's first days together as newlyweds seemed full of hope. They talked about traveling, starting a family, and building a home that would reflect both of their traditions. But behind Rajiv's calm eyes was something Emily could not yet see, something that would eventually turn their dream into a chilling nightmare. Rajiv's life in Texas appeared polished from the outside, but those who knew him closely recognized his intense need for control. He had grown up with high expectations placed upon him, and the pressure to succeed shaped everything about the way he lived. In his mind, appearances mattered more than anything else. He wanted the perfect marriage, the perfect home, and the perfect reputation within his community. When he married Emily, many believed he had achieved exactly that. He presented her proudly at gatherings, showing off their marriage as a symbol of success. Yet beneath the smiles, there was an unsettling pattern. Rajiv began to question Emily about her family, her upbringing, and even small details from her past. At first, Emily took it as curiosity, the kind of thing any new husband might ask. But over time, the questions grew more pointed, almost like an interrogation. He wanted to know every detail, not just about who she was, but about how others perceived her. Friends noticed how he would steer conversations back to Emily's background, probing with a persistence that made some uncomfortable. Rajiv also had a habit of comparing their life to others, making remarks about how couples should appear in public or how a wife should behave. He became obsessed with the idea of image, of what people might think if something about Emily did not fit into his rigid expectations. These behaviors, though subtle at first, painted a picture of a man who wasn't just curious. He was consumed by control. Emily, still caught in the glow of new love, didn't see the warning signs. She believed his attention was a sign of devotion, never imagining that the questions hinted at a darker truth waiting to surface. The honeymoon phase faded more quickly than Emily ever expected. Just weeks into their marriage, the man she once saw as charming and protective began to change in unsettling ways. Rajiv's once gentle tone became sharp, his affection replaced by cold stares and sudden bursts of irritation. Emily noticed how he monitored her every move. He checked her phone when she wasn't looking, questioned her about the smallest details of her day, and criticized her choices with a harshness that left her feeling small. At first, she tried to excuse his behavior. She told herself that he was simply adjusting to a new life in a different culture, that maybe he just needed time. But the restrictions grew heavier. He discouraged her from spending time with her closest friends and subtly made her feel guilty for calling her family too often. What had once been casual outings now became tense negotiations, with Emily asking permission instead of making plans freely. The vibrant woman who had once been full of laughter started to grow quiet. She confided in her sister through late-night calls, admitting that she felt suffocated. Still, Emily held on to hope. She believed the man she married was still there beneath the anger and that, with patience, things would return to the way they had been in the beginning. She clung to memories of their early days together, convincing herself that love could heal the growing distance between them. What Emily didn't realize was that these cracks in her marriage were not temporary flaws. They were the first visible signs of a dangerous shift, one that would soon spiral into something far more threatening than she could ever imagine. The turning point arrived quietly, hidden in the ordinary rhythm of a late evening at home. Rajiv had developed a habit of going through Emily's belongings when she wasn't around, always searching for details he felt she had not fully revealed. One night, while she was in the shower, he opened a box she had kept on a closet shelf. Inside were family photographs, documents, and mementos from her childhood. What he found stopped him cold. There were pictures of Emily's grandparents, smiling proudly, their African-American heritage unmistakable. There were school projects describing her family tree, celebrating the diversity she had always carried with pride. To Emily, these items were simple keepsakes. To Rajiv, they were a revelation that shook the image he had carefully constructed of his life. He had believed his wife to be someone who would fit neatly into the picture he wanted to present to the world. Seeing those photographs and reading those words destroyed that illusion. His thoughts twisted quickly, turning from surprise to resentment and finally to rage. In his mind, this was not just about identity. It was about control slipping through his hands. He felt deceived, even though Emily had never hidden the truth. When she returned and noticed the box disturbed, she sensed immediately that something was wrong. Rajiv's expression was no longer curious or affectionate, but cold, like a stranger's. From that night on, the atmosphere in their home shifted. Tension grew heavy in the air, every conversation edged with unspoken hostility. For Emily, the discovery of what he had learned was terrifying not because of what it revealed about her background, but because of what it revealed about the man she had married. The night of violence came without warning, yet in hindsight, the signs had been building for weeks. Rajiv had grown increasingly restless, pacing the house in silence, avoiding eye contact, and responding to Emily's attempts at kindness with cutting remarks. The air inside their home had become suffocating, and Emily felt like she was walking on broken glass, never sure what might trigger his anger. That evening, the fragile balance finally shattered. It began with an argument that escalated faster than Emily could process. Rajiv's voice, once calm and measured, rose into a fury she had never heard before. He accused her of betraying him, of embarrassing him, of ruining the future he believed he deserved. His words were laced with venom, each sentence louder and more dangerous than the last. Then the shouting turned physical. Furniture crashed against the walls as his rage consumed the room. Emily tried to protect herself, but Rajiv's assault was brutal and relentless. Neighbors later recalled hearing the sounds of chaos, thuds, glass breaking, and muffled cries that carried through the quiet Texas night. Inside, Emily fought for her life, her body marked by blows that seemed fueled by more than anger, by something deeper and far more terrifying. By the time the storm subsided, the house was in ruins. Shards of glass littered the floor, chairs lay overturned, and blood marked the places where Emily had tried to shield herself. In that moment, she realized the man she had married was gone, replaced by someone she could no longer recognize. The dream she once lived had ended, and in its place stood only fear, violence, and the desperate need to survive. Emily's escape was nothing short of a miracle. Bloodied and shaken, she saw only one chance to survive, to get out of the house before Rajiv struck again. The pain from her injuries slowed her down, but adrenaline carried her forward. She staggered through the wreckage of the living room, stepping over shattered glass and broken furniture, each movement sharp with agony. Behind her, Rajiv shouted angrily, pacing like a predator unwilling to let go. She managed to reach the front door, fumbling with the lock as her hands trembled. Finally, the latch gave way, and Emily burst into the night air. The cool Texas wind hit her face, mixing with tears and blood as she ran barefoot across the yard. Her cries for help pierced the silence, startling neighbors who had already been disturbed by the commotion inside the house. One neighbor opened their door just in time to see Emily collapse onto their porch. Terrified but determined, she begged them to call the police. They pulled her inside and tried to comfort her while dialing 911. Their voices panicked as they described the brutal assault unfolding next door. Minutes later, flashing lights illuminated the street. Police officers rushed toward the house, weapons drawn, prepared for the worst. Inside, they found Rajiv pacing erratically, his face expressionless, as if the destruction around him meant nothing. He did not resist as officers placed him in handcuffs, though the silence in his eyes unsettled everyone in the room. For Emily, sitting in the neighbor's living room with medics treating her wounds, the nightmare was far from over. She had escaped the violence, but the trauma would remain, etched into her memory with every scar that now marked her body. The trial became the center of attention in the small Texas town, drawing reporters, neighbors, and strangers who wanted to understand how a marriage that once looked picture-perfect had descended into brutality. Rajiv sat in the courtroom expressionless, dressed neatly, as if trying to cling to an image of control. Emily, her injuries still healing, entered the room with visible scars and an unshakable determination to tell the truth. Prosecutors laid out the chilling details for the jury. They presented photographs of the crime scene, the overturned furniture, the shattered glass, and the bloodstains that painted a vivid picture of the violence. Medical experts testified about the extent of Emily's injuries, describing how close she had come to losing her life. What shocked many most, however, was the motive. Rajiv had admitted during questioning that his rage ignited after discovering Emily's racial background. To the jury, it was a disturbing revelation that turned the case from one of domestic violence into a story of deep prejudice and obsession. Emily's testimony was the most powerful moment of the trial. Her voice trembled at times, but her words were clear. She spoke about the fear she lived in, the controlling behavior that escalated, and the night she believed she would die. The courtroom fell silent as she recounted her desperate escape. Rajiv's defense tried to argue cultural misunderstanding, painting him as a man overwhelmed by pressure. But the jury was unmoved. After hours of deliberation, the verdict came back, guilty on all counts. The decision was swift and unanimous, a resounding acknowledgement of the horror Emily had endured. Justice, at least in the eyes of the community, had been served. The sentencing brought a measure of closure, but it could not erase the damage. Rajiv received a lengthy prison term, his once carefully constructed image shattered in front of the very community he had worked so hard to impress. He was led away in silence, his face blank, his future sealed behind prison walls. For many, it was a stark reminder of how hatred and control can hide beneath a polished exterior. Emily, though relieved by the verdict, faced a different kind of battle. She had survived the violence, but the scars ran deeper than the wounds on her skin. Nights were the hardest, when the memories returned with vivid clarity, sounds of breaking glass, the sting of his words, the feeling of running barefoot into the darkness for her life. Therapy became her lifeline, a space where she could begin piecing herself back together after her world had been torn apart. She eventually moved away from Texas, choosing a new city where few knew her name and even fewer knew her story. Starting over was painful, but it gave her the distance she needed to heal. Emily turned her survival into strength, speaking quietly but firmly about the dangers of ignoring red flags and the importance of recognizing control and prejudice before they spiral into violence. Her story spread beyond her small town, shared in newspapers, podcasts, and documentaries. It became more than just one woman's tragedy. It became a warning. For every person who heard it, the case stood as a haunting reminder of how love can be twisted by obsession and how silence in the face of abuse can have devastating consequences. Emily's survival, though hard one, was her ultimate act of defiance.